let's look at Kant's examples. And again, here we're just illustrating the imperative. It's not like just to make this consistent with what Kant said at the very beginning about not deriving moral rules from examples. That's not what he's doing here. He's already derived his moral rule from reason, from the idea that, or actually, well, the sort of defense of how this comes out of reason, I think, is something that is better developed by moving forward in the book than by the stuff we have right now. But in any case, here is something that, here is an imperative that is not going to depend on any particular ends of the agent that would give rise to hypothetical imperatives. This imperative is not going to be something of the sort where, if you want these things, then you should do this. This is going to be independent from any particular ends. It's going to be something that comes out of your nature as a rational being itself. And if it's independent from any particular ends that some rational beings might not have, then it should apply to all rational beings, since it just depends on what's common to all rational beings. If it's something that's common to all rational beings, if it's something that should apply to all rational beings, well, then it should be something that we can see as a law for all of them. It won't just apply to some of them and not others. And this is how you can test the value of any moral principle, which is supposed to apply as a universal law for rational beings. If it does, it should be something that you can will to be a universal law for all of them, because that's what moral rules are supposed to be like. Okay. So let's take a look at Kant's examples. First, he has this case where a man feels sick of life as the result of a series of misfortunes. So this man has, lived a life that's turned very bad, and so he's thinking of killing himself to end his misery. Now, Kant thinks that you should not commit suicide to escape a miserable life. And why is this? Well, here's how he brings it under the formula of universal law. You couldn't will a universal system of nature in which the desire to escape misery would end life. Because any universal system of nature that's going to, I guess that's going to function properly, I'm a little bit unclear about how to present this properly, but if you had a system of nature in which the motivation to pursue happiness, which really does, further our own lives generally and keep us going in the world. If you had a system of nature where that destroyed life, well, I guess that would destroy itself. So let me say this. I think the second example that Kant has is probably the best example. It's the one where you can most clearly see how there's some contradiction. Because you might say here, okay, there's a bunch of things, that might well, there's a bunch of ways of organizing some system of nature where if you organize them that way, something would happen that would end up destroying the entire system. Under particular contingent, situations, there might be, eating to maintain yourself in existence is a good thing to do in some cases, but you might have situations where if you eat to maintain yourself in existence, you're going to end up, destroying resources that are essential, and, that'll end up actually, because of a bizarre ecological situation, destroying everybody. You could have weird situations that go one way or the other, and it seems like it's going to be more or less contingent how these things work. So you could have a situation in which, some really bizarre situation, this is kind of weird, but I guess you could have a situation in which people trying to destroy themselves actually end up preserving themselves in some weird way, just because the system of nature they were in was very strange like that. Some place where all the things that you would try to use to commit suicide actually are necessary for keeping your life going. There's just this world of, syringes that say poison on them, but as it turns out, they're full of essential vitamins, and no one's ever going to get any vitamins unless they try to commit suicide. You could have bizarre situations like that, where, systems of nature where trying to, kill yourself ends up preserving yourself. Now, look, again, these are bizarre, but I don't know how to rule out the bizarre systems of nature. and say, okay, those can't count without bringing in empirical stuff. The way you'd think you could rule those systems out and say, look, those systems of nature shouldn't count, and we should set them aside, is going to be something like, well, look at our system of nature, it's not like that. We shouldn't say systems of nature can be like that through some kind of empirical observation. But I don't know if that kind of empirical observation is allowed in setting up Kant's theory. So anyway, let me bypass the first example, but I hope I've given you some illustration of how Kant thinks the principle could apply. So even if it isn't a great example, and I've heard a famous Kant scholar that I once took some classes with say Kant is terrible at thinking up examples. And so maybe that's what's going on here. But anyway, the second example. This is basically the clearest example, I think, of how it's supposed to work. So the second example involves someone making false promises for money. And I've talked about this in class before and in both discussions. Well, false promises can only succeed if people expect the promises to be kept. If people don't expect you to keep your promise, they're not going to give you anything on the basis of your false promise. It's only if people expect you to keep the promise that they're going to loan you the money or whatever you want on the basis of this false promise. So if everybody accepted a maxim of making false promises for money, you'd end up in a situation where people would realize that the promises people make aren't any good, because everybody just goes around making false promises. So why would anyone lend money to anybody on the basis of a promise to repay it? Everybody knows these false promises are just, that you're never going to get your money back. So no one is going to end up honoring these. No one is going to end up trusting these promises. So if you try to will a universal law of people making loans on the basis of people, asking for money. Say it again. If you're trying to will a universal law that people should make false promises in order to get money, that situation just isn't going to even hold together. It's going to be a situation where if everybody operates on that maxim, the action is going to fail. Everybody's action is going to fail. Your action is going to fail. You can't do this and will it as a universal law for all rational beings. So you can't will that you should make a false promise and that this should be a universal law, because you're willing something that prevents your action from succeeding, and that prevents anybody's action from succeeding. In fact, this seems to be something where you can't even just imagine a situation, so Kant thinks, where everybody does this. So that's why you can't will a universal law of making false promises. It's not because there are bad consequences to everybody making false promises. Sure, that'd be a pretty bad world to live in. But the idea that this would cause the destruction of industry, or people wouldn't be able to trust each other, and so a bunch of social institutions would fail, and we would all be in a bad way. That's not Kant's point here. That's something we can gather about the effects of losing our system of trusting promises that comes out of experience. It doesn't come from pure reason itself. So that thing about the consequences, that's not the point here that Kant's going for. Kant is going for the thing that comes out of reason, so he thinks, which is that if you were to have everybody making false promises for money, the institution of promising would disappear, and you just couldn't have people still making false promises for money. That's the point here. Now, you could say, well, something empirical has gotten in here, the idea that people have the capacity for memory and thus can remember false promises. Doesn't that come from experience? Well, that's a pretty good objection. I don't really know how to deal with that.